אז תודה רבה שבאתם להרצאת פזנר, אני אעבור לאנגלית כדי להציג את האורח. So, this is the memorial, biannual memorial Pazner lecture. Elisha Pazner was a distinguished member of the department when it was still a department, not a school, from 1971 until his sudden death in 1979. And since 1982, the department began the memorial lecture to commemorate his name, and thanks to the family's kind donation, we've been able to maintain this series, and we've been able to boast a truly remarkable series of speakers from the top of economic theory. And so, thank you. I'd like to thank the family on the behalf of the school, and this brings me to Joel Sobel, today's speaker. So Joel has been one of the leading economic theorist in the last 4 years. He got his PhD in applied math, actually, at Berkeley in 1978, and since then his academic home has been the University of California in San Diego. So 40 years. So they sometimes say that economists have the loyalty of the cat. Apparently Joel is not a cat. Okay. So Joel is most well known for his contributions to the theory of strategic communication, starting from his classic 1982 paper with Vince Crawford, really truly one of the very few absolute true classics in modern game theory. And Joel has continued to make important contributions to this area since then. And remarkably, and it's not true for every field in game theory, this remains an active and vibrant field, one of the frontier subjects these days. And Joel has also made contributions that are important to other fields, like other regarding preferences, evolutionary game theory, refinements of Nash equilibrium. And so I'm very happy to introduce Joel here, and he's going to talk about lying and deception in games. Thank you.
I start. This is an honor to be here, to be in a place where the wonderful economic theorists work, to continue on a tradition. It's a responsibility. I thought hard about the generating an anecdote about Elisha Pazner. My academic career started in 1978, so there's a sense in which there was a little bit of an overlap. But I did not meet him, I didn't interact with him, and I can't say that there is a direct connection. So, if you will, I have two little bits of indirection to start. And I have a sort of somber introduction and a frivolous one. And I think that they're both too extreme, but perhaps they average out into something that is okay. So the somber is that this invitation gave me an opportunity to reflect. I could not, unfortunately, generate, personal memories of Elisha Pazner, but I could generate personal memories. And the first is narcissistic. And when you are aware that some people who are just like you do not live to be 64, you can reflect and feel that you're fortunate to have had a longer life. And then with a little bit of sadness, you reflect that perhaps you did not make the most out of every day. So I'm inspired to do that. The other thing is that I have lost close associates, friends and colleagues who died and around the age of 40, and they are with me, but they've been closer to me in the last few weeks thanks to this. So that's the somber. The more frivolous is this. So here is a little quotation, and I will play with this pointer. So I don't want to achieve immortality through my work. I want to achieve immortality through not dying. I don't want to live on in the hearts of my countrymen. I want to live on in my apartment. So I am not sure if that would reflect the wishes of Pazner, but perhaps it is the wishes of most of us. This isn't possible for everyone, but I do have a day job now that involves editing a journal. And quite coincidentally, there was a submission 3 days ago that cited 3 papers from the late 1970s of Pazner and Schmeidler. And it is unusual in this transient profession for contributions of 40 years ago to be cited in important foundations for contemporary work. So, alas, not immortality through not dying, but immortality through this sequence of lectures, through your own memories, and a couple of citations. I can't guarantee that this paper will be published in Econometrica. It is under review. It will be handled with respect. I don't know if this adds to the frivolous part, but the quote comes from Woody Allen. So I am going to give a presentation. I will start now. This is a somewhat unusual topic. And basically, a task that I set for myself is to define some words. These are fairly common English language words. So when I define them, I'm going to be competing with dictionaries. I'm going to be competing with common usage. I do not mean to replace the dictionaries. What I mean to do is to try to get these ideas straight in my head. So I've studied strategic communication for a long time, and by strategic communication, I roughly mean a setting where I know something that you don't know, and I have an opportunity to talk to you, but the fact that we might be interested in different things could interfere with me telling you everything that I know, you getting full information from me. And these models are great, you know, they pay the bills, but one aspect that is a little bit frustrating on one hand and sort of amazing on the other is that they create the possibility of communication without actually having natural language words. Sometimes, somehow, the players in these games figure out that there's meaning in abstract messages. And that's wonderful in the sense that a simple abstract model can carry that information. The ability to communicate takes over and creates a life of its own. On the other hand, it's disappointing because in real life, words mean something, and the meaning of those words carries over from situation to situation to situation. The reason that this is relevant is that even though I study strategic communication, and even though in strategic communication there's clearly incentives to do things that informally are like lying. I want you to think that my graduate student is terrific, even though maybe she isn't, and I write a letter saying she's terrific. And that's not quite true. Well, the abstract models don't quite get that. And people have asked me, you know, do you have a model of lying? And I said, I don't know what lying means. So I set myself a task of writing down in the symbols that I use to describe games, definitions of words like this. So why? The basic reason is I'm in a position where I can be selfish. That is to say, I can think about something that's interesting to me, and they won't take my job away. And I'm grateful for that. The other thing, the second thing is pedantic but ambitious. There are other people who work in this research area. They use these words, and they use them in an informal way that's not consistent across cases. And it would be nice for scholarly communication if you didn't have to give your definition of the term every time it came up. So I aspire to be a leader. I'll write down my definitions, and people will follow me, and then it'll be easier to talk to each other. There's a little bit of dishonesty in that because dictionaries have already written down definitions, and I'm going to change them. The third thing and the fourth thing are really important in my research agenda, but limitations of my own abilities and what I know now and limitations of time will prevent me from saying a lot. But number 3 is something that I can highlight and give you a flavor of. There's a kind of strong feeling that economists get things right and they get things wrong when they talk about strategic communication. The thing that they get right is that sometimes sort of hard economic incentives force or seduce people into being dishonest. They'll lie because they can make money out of lying. The thing that's not quite standard in the way that economists model and think about these issues is that people seem to not want to lie, in the sense that they'll be willing to sacrifice some advantage, some strict financial advantage, in order to avoid having to tell a lie. Now, I want to argue, and I won't make this point today, but I'll tempt you with it, that those kind of costs differ across categories. And deceiving someone, in my terms and informally, is something that's not quite as costly for a strategic actor. To the extent that that's true, it might inform you, it might help you look at situations and say, oh, that's why there's some sort of dishonesty or bad behavior going on. And it might give you some guidance as to how to arrange communication to make it more effective. The fourth thing is maybe a joke, but 2 years and 3 days ago, I woke up and I was quite frightened by what my country did. It's sort of apparent to me that discourse in the United States and perhaps in the world has a before Donald Trump and an after Donald Trump phase. And it is part of the agenda to sort of get a handle on things like this. Okay, I will not enlighten you about that today, but I actually hope somehow to understand what's going on in my country a little bit better using simple game theory. Okay, this is one of my favorite quotes, and this quote sets my talk in context and is something that you should keep in mind. This is me trying to be modest or to warn you of something. So in mathematics, names are free. It's perfectly allowable to call a self-adjoint operator an elephant and a spectral resolution a trunk. One can then prove a theorem whereby all elephants have trunks. So those are just changing words around. If you've forgotten your math but once knew it, this is referring to a theorem that says you can diagonalize matrices. And the final sentence is, what is not allowable is to pretend that this result has anything to do with certain large gray animals. So when you're a mathematician, you can name things however you want, and then you can make a statement about it. And if you follow the rules of mathematics, that statement will be true mathematically. But it's a mistake to think that just because you had the audacity to name certain formal structures, that the translation of the mathematics is really a statement about the world. Well, I'm going to perform a kind of abstract analysis, but I will make statements like deception is possible in equilibrium. And this is only meaningful if you think that my mathematical definition of deception and my notion of equilibrium conform to something that really is meaningful in the outside world. So take everything that I say or suggest as only as good as my definitions. Okay, there's a little mathematical exercise, and that's clean and simple, but there's an interpretation exercise, and that's where, you know, I might be trying to trick you, or by not being completely airtight and logical. Okay, just for sake of reference, Hector Sussman is a mathematician, and he was writing about what could be called, in a pompous way, the mathematical theory of singularities of mappings. But the person who developed that theory had the audacity to call that catastrophe theory. and then people applied catastrophe theory to earthquakes. And that was a kind of extended analogy. So I'm going to pause and give you a formal model, and then there's going to be a table that sort of describes all the things that I can do. And then I'm going to have to step back and say, I'm not going to do that. So there's going to be sort of more artifice than I wish I had to present. So what I want to do is offer up a fairly simple model of communication. And I'm going to use that model to hang ideas. And remember, my ideas that I'm after is finding a way to define lie, finding a way to define deception, and then I'm going to divide these cases up. So it's a taxonomic exercise. So in this world, there's just going to be two people. One person is a sender, the other person is a receiver. The sender is an informed agent, and she will learn theta. She will learn some information. The sender then, having heard that, has an opportunity to say something and do something. What she says is M, message. What she does is X, action. And then the receiver, what he does is he hears M. He doesn't see the X. He doesn't know the state. And then he does something. So here I am. I'm the sender. I know the quality of my student. I write a letter. She's terrific. You read the letter. That letter is M. And from that, you try to draw an inference about how good my student is. Okay? And then you, the receiver, take an action Y. You hire my student, or you offer her a higher salary. And we play this out. We evaluate these things with utility functions. So to tie this model up, there has to be some notion in the background of what the state of the world is, how good that student is, that you're thinking before you hear from me. Okay, so this is a basic model of communication. As a linguistic note, when I speak, the sender is female and the receiver is male, and this is based on introspection. The female agent is the informed agent. So if you know standard labor market signaling, this model is general enough to include this, although there's a technicality. I do not want M to be directly involved in the preferences of the receiver. So this would be a stripped down labor market signaling where the educational investment doesn't directly influence productivity. It includes cheap talk. Cheap talk is the name for models in which that message doesn't enter into preferences at all. So I write the letter of recommendation. It doesn't cost me anything to use the word terrific. It doesn't cost you anything to read the word terrific. I'm just talking for the sake of talking. Okay, and it includes some more general situations. So what I want to add to this story is a notion of a dictionary that lives outside of the model. So remember, when I started, I said my challenge was that I deal with these models of strategic communication, and I'm confronted with the problem that it looks like people are not telling the truth. They're changing theta into something that isn't theta for strategic advantage. But in fact, the models don't have a structured relationship between M's and thetas. That relationship is invented in equilibrium. If that was abstract out a little bit later, I'll try to be still abstract but a bit more concrete. Okay, what I'm going to lay on the model is a dictionary that exists outside the game. And the dictionary is fairly simple. There are these states, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Capital theta is the first 5 positive integers. And I have a word for each of these subsets. So I have a word for 1, 3, 5, the odd numbers between 1 and 5. I have a word 3. I have a word 2. And that's just lying there. So there's a dictionary that says there's an M for every little subset. And I'm going to take that and I'm going to add it to my basic model. And the reason I do that is because lying for me is going to be a relationship between the theta that I'm thinking of, the M that I say, and the dictionary. And we'll see a definition soon, but not quite. When I describe this, I haven't analyzed the game. All I've said is that there's a dictionary. So this is a phone call from Professor Robert Aumann. And I'm rather embarrassed that I'm putting him on hold. But I don't know how to make it go away.
It's like you can take the call, right?
No.
15 minutes and take the call.
Okay, that's right. So this is perhaps the most honor I have ever received, giving this lecture and having Aumann phone me in the same moment. But I understand that it's disrespectful to not turn off my phone. The sender need not tell the truth. The strategic analysis is how people play this game. I haven't told you anything about that. I'm just giving you definitions, rules. There may be costs with lying. This is really at the foundation of what are you going to do with all these definitions. So as I indicated earlier, I think that it is accurate to say that people don't like to lie, that there are costs that perhaps naive economists wouldn't be inclined to put into models, but descriptive behavioral economists would. Okay. The third is that as I talk about these things, I want to be general enough to include the possibility that the sender is insane. You know, if I'm a crazy person and I think I am Napoleon, according to my definition, if I say I am a Napoleon, I am telling the truth. Okay? I want to allow the possibility that the sender and the receiver have different models of the world. If this is the case, everything is in terms of the sender's mind. Okay, now I'm going to begin the taxonomy, and I'm going to begin the taxonomy by stealing from another discipline. So I'm going to introduce you to 3 words that I did not invent, but these 3 words are useful. The first word is locution, the second word is illocution, the third word is perlocution. The person who coined them is named John Austin. John Austin did this in 1960 or so, and he is a linguistic philosopher. And he had other things in mind, but here's the trichotomy. Locution is going to be what I say, ba, 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 ba. Illocution is how you interpret it. So when I say something, it doesn't just vanish, it hits your head, and something happens inside you. And perlocution is the consequences of that. So I'm going to divide up categories according to these 3 things, and I'm going to claim that this is useful to me. Lying is going to be associated with locution. I've kept you here for 20 minutes, and you haven't seen the first definition yet. You're a few pages away. Deception is going to be associated with illocution, and damaging and bluffing is going to be perlocution. So lying is going to be just about what I say in the dictionary. It's not going to be about what you think about what I say or what I think you think about what I say. Deception is about me influencing what you believe. So I deceive you if I push your beliefs in the wrong direction. And perlocution is going to be the impact of that. And I have 2 terms because there's an impact on you and there's an impact on me. So damage is going to be thinking about the impact on you, and bluffing is going to be thinking about the impact on me. The reason that there's a little bit of asymmetry is that if I'm doing the talking, then probably I'm not going to damage myself. Okay, so lying is not going to depend on a theory of mind, of how you interpret things. Deception doesn't refer to consequences. It's not about what happens, it's about what you believe. Damage does refer to consequences and refer to the audience. Bluff refers to the talker. Okay. Now, I gave a talk on Sunday in Jerusalem, and I said, this talk has one theorem. And I wrote down the theorem, and I described it. I gave a talk here yesterday, and I said, this talk has two theorems. And I talked about both of them. And then I said, I'm giving a talk the next day, and there are 21 results. And this is ridiculous. Nobody, if you have 21 results, it means you have none. So this little table, there are 21 blank spots, and it's sort of a structure of the sandbox I've created for myself. So by creating these divisions, I can ask a whole bunch of questions. The important thing of this talk is dividing the world into locution, illocution, perlocution. It's getting this perspective. The details are a few of these properties. So in this page, I just want to show you the outline, the terrain. So I've got a column with locution. I told you that that's what's said. In order to evaluate this, I need this dictionary that I've told you about. And then I'm going to talk about these things as lies. And then I can ask a bunch of questions. If you're in a strategic situation and you look at it for an equilibrium, can there be lies? If you're in a strategic situation and you don't want to lie, can you avoid it? If you're in a strategic situation and you have exactly the same preferences as the person you're talking to, will you lie? And so there are questions like that. And then there's another column. I'll talk about illocution. Illocution is what it means. And in order to talk about that in a formal context, I'll need the notion of beliefs. And I'll call these things deception. And then I'll ask the same kinds of questions. And finally, for perlocution. So officially, I fill in these blanks. And at the end of the talk, we'll have this table again with yeses and nos and question marks. But I don't want you to remember 21 things. I guess I want you to remember 3. Okay? So Sunday was 1, yesterday was 2, today is 3, and I'll figure out how to get 4 tomorrow. Okay, at last a definition. So all of this has been a warm-up. Here's a definition. In words, lying is going to be when the informed person says something that she believes to be false. Okay, these are some symbols, and it shows you sort of 3 flavors. So if I know that the state is 1, I could say the state is 2. That's a lie. I could say the state is 1. That's the whole truth. I could say the state is odd. That's true, but it's not the whole truth. So that's all this says. Pretty simple. Okay. Nothing in this refers to how you interpret what I say. Nothing in this refers to what I intend to do to you. And there are a whole bunch of things that are interesting that really aren't talked about here. So, for example, if I am an actor and I come and I enter the stage and I say, I am Hamlet, and you know that I'm an actor, have I lied? If I'm a joker and I say something that is clearly ironic by the tone of my voice, am I lying? If I'm in a situation where for some reason I can say or do something to you that will prevent you from doing something bad if I distort the truth. So a white lie, a positive lie. Does that really count? So is a joke a lie? I'm basically taking a sterile position. And the sterile position is, nope, a lie is what I said on the previous page. This is somewhat important because if you took a modal philosophical view, intention to deceive, which would include illocution, would be involved. So this is an opportunity to say that my definition isn't completely arbitrary. There's a little bit of empirical support for it. And it's an idea, an opportunity to do something, I don't know, frivolous on the next page. So Coleman and Kay are anthropologists writing in, I think, the late 1970s. And they performed a non-incentivized experiment in which they created 8 scripts. And I will show you one of them in a moment. And the reason they got 8 is that they looked at 3 properties of statements. One property is the statement literally true or false? The second property is the statement true or false in the mind of the speaker? The third is, is the statement made with an intention to deceive? So if you look at each of these three things, you could turn any of them off and on independently. So if it's false and the speaker believes it to be false and the intention is to deceive, that's one case. If it's true and the speaker believes it's false and the intention to deceive, that's another case. And they invented 8 such scripts. And they asked their undergraduates, is this a lie on a scale of 1 to 7? And they tabulated it. And the answer they got was my definition. That is to say, it's not the truth value of the statement, not the intention to deceive that matters, but the second thing. Okay, so this is an example, one of the 8. I will distance myself from this example after I read it. Smolovich is invited to dinner at his boss's house. After a dismal evening enjoyed by no one, Smolovich says to his hostess, "Thanks, that was a terrific party." Smolovich does not believe it was a terrific party. And he really is not trying to convince anyone that he had a good time. But he's just concerned to say something nice to his boss's wife, regardless of the fact that he doesn't expect her to believe it. Did Smolovich lie? So there are 8 stories like this. So it's pretty clear that this lays out rather explicitly the 1, 2, 3. Okay, the statement is false. Thanks, it was a terrific party. It wasn't a terrific party in Smolovich's mind. The statement was not intended to deceive. Again, that's explicitly stated. And the Smolovich himself believes the statement to be false. Okay, I want to distance myself from the following. So I don't know what valence Smolovich has, but it's the name supplied by Coleman and Kay. I picked this example in part because the one that I really wanted to use, the character's name was Pig Fat, and I didn't want to type that. The other things are that here in the 21st century, it should not be taken for granted that Smolovich's boss is male and that the partner of his boss is female. So, well, it's his boss's house and his hostess.
He's a female and his partner is a female.
Okay, it could very well be. So, in any... Smolovich is male. So there are 2 genders indicated in this out of the 3. Okay. So where am I now? I've promised you 3 or 4 definitions. I've given you 1. And I showed you this table of 21 boxes, and I haven't filled in any of them. Well, I really want to give you the 3 definitions, and I want to give you a flavor of some of those properties. And these properties are ones that are true about the relationship between lying and equilibrium in simple strategic models of communication. Okay, so cheap talk game, that's a game where the M's don't enter into anybody's preferences. Common language means that there's a dictionary somewhere. There always exists an equilibrium involving lies. So this statement says that if all you do is look at the game theory and look at my dictionary, the game theory can ignore the dictionary. And here's a way to get the feel for either the good or the bad part of these strategic models. So suppose that we're in a situation where I know something that you don't know, And what I know is whether it's raining or not. And we have to coordinate. You have to either bring sunscreen or an umbrella. And you're about to get on the plane and come to me. And one thing that I can do is say, it's raining. And you interpret that as it's raining and you bring an umbrella and we're happy. At the same time, in order for that to work, you probably interpret the statement, it's sunny, as a sign that it's sunny, and you will bring sunscreen. That's a perfect solution to the coordination problem. The trouble is that there's another perfect solution to the coordination problem. And that's the one where it's opposite day. So I say, it's raining. And you understand that whenever I say it's raining, it means the sun is shining. So I say it's raining when the sun is shining. When I say it's raining, you bring sunscreen. Okay? The weird thing about the economic model of communication is that both of those things are possible, and in some sense, both of them work well. This isn't a triviality. It really is a sign that even the natural language that we use is arbitrary. So you're aware of situations where the same sound means something different in different languages. So the nice story that I know is that there is a car in the United States called the Chevrolet Nova. The Nova sort of suggests to an English speaker a star and brightness and possibly speed. And they tried to sell this car in Mexico as a Chevrolet Nova. Then nobody bought it. Porque en español, Nova significa doesn't run. So Nova means doesn't go. So in the United States, they were selling the car, in the star. In Mexico, they were selling the doesn't go. So there really is arbitrariness like this. And all that I say in the first comment is that that's with you. I can't guarantee just because I have a dictionary that people will use it truthfully. The second statement is a statement about how strategic interaction influences the temptation to use language. So these CS Cheap Talk games are special ones, but you can identify games in which there's possibility for positive coordination for information in this event, but there's never the ability to fully communicate. So I'm going to talk to you about the temperature. Let's see, we're going to coordinate, and I want to convince you to meet me at a restaurant, but I don't want to get there first. So I'm going to tell you when I arrive, and then I'm going to subtract 5 minutes so that you'll sort of induce you to get there early. You want to get there at exactly the right time. In situations like that, there'll never be an equilibrium in which I tell you the whole truth. There's this tension. So I might tell you that I'll be there after 9 o'clock, and that'll be accurate, but I won't tell you that I'm going to be there at 9:03. Because if you believe me, I'll tell you that when I'm going to be there at 9:08. Okay? So in games like that, you can never have an equilibrium with the whole truth. I've got to hide something. And then the third line is sort of a parallel to the first. In games like this, you can rig things so that nobody's actually lying. So you can rig it so that if I'm going to tell you that I'm going to come before or after 9 o'clock, then I use the dictionary properly. So I say something that's vague but honest. Okay.
How do you put some trust into the relationship?
So I'm going to answer this in two shallow ways, and then I'll move on. One way is that the idea of equilibrium is in some sense a measure of trust. That is to say, equilibrium assumes that we have a common understanding of how things are used, and you can build upon that common understanding. Now, that's a little bit incomplete because you have a right to say, where does that equilibrium come from? And you can say that for a long time, but I'm not going to answer it today. The second response is that There are interesting ways of formulating these things as dynamic relationships, and you need to make some assumptions, but there are situations where trust is something that's generated by looking back at past successes. So essentially, you tell a story that if I've told you that use the word raining on sunny days 5 days in a row, then you come to think that maybe that's the way that I use the word, and you will, quote, trust me to be systematically unreliable, according to the dictionary. Okay. This is a page with too many symbols. I apologize for this. I'm going to talk for a bit. Those of you who are good at symbols can read and not listen to me. Those of you who aren't, I'm going to have pictures on the next page. So I'm not going to interpret these symbols, but I'm going to move to deception. Lying, locution. Deception, illocution. What's illocution? It's manipulating beliefs. It's what does my statement do to what you're thinking? Okay? So deception informally is this. I'm going to say that something's deceptive if it makes your beliefs bad. In order to formalize that, I've got to do two things. I've got to have sort of a language for talking about your beliefs and sort of what choices I have of beliefs that I could make you have. And I need to have a definition of what bad is. The language for beliefs are these distributions mu. So theta is what I know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What you think in the beginning is each of these 5 things are equally likely. So I might have the best student in the world, I might have the worst student in the world, I might have somebody in the bottom 30%, and so on. And you know the history of students I have, and when I'm about ready to tell you about the new one, you think, oh, well, it's equally likely to be these things. And then there's this posterior distribution. When I say M prime, when I say she's pretty good, you move that distribution from equally likely to be any of the 5 to pretty likely to be 3 or 4. Okay, and this is just the language. So those are my choices. When I talk, I can induce the belief that she's wonderful, the belief that she's terrible, or whatever the range of these mu's are. What's a bad belief? Well, a bad belief is relative to the truth. So the truth is, I know, or I think that theta is right. She's really mediocre. I make a statement, and you have a whole bunch of things that you might believe after my statement. A bad belief is somehow further from the actual truth than the one another one that I could induce. So there are lots of ways to describe bad, and here are 2 pictures. So this triangle is the set of all beliefs you could have. Up at the top is the truth. That's probability 1 on theta. And this is sort of everything's equally likely. Let's imagine that I could say the word n, and when I say it, mu is what you believe. All this shaded stuff is further away from mu in the sense that in order to get from here to here, you drag it down using something that has 0 probability of mu. So one notion of deception is what I say is deceptive if I induce beliefs in this shaded region and I could have made you think this. Okay? There's another notion of deception that's harder to satisfy. So the previous page had 2 lines. This is the picture for the second line. This now is what I say. This is M and not N. And then everything on this line is closer to theta. Okay? So I would say that this thing is deceptive if there was a word that I could use that would push me up closer to theta. Okay? These 2 pictures are different in the sense that this one makes it seem like it's really hard to be deceptive. That line is thin, and I may not be able to induce a belief over there. Okay, the other one, that region was thick, so there are lots of possibilities. What I want you to think, though, is that deception is about inducing bad beliefs, and there are two tricky parts. One is, what are the set of beliefs? What can I make you think? And that's the mu, theta, any old m. And the second thing is, what do I mean by bad? And I've given you two flavors. Then I'm going to move towards a result, and the result is going to indicate that there's sort of a family of connections between how strong, how hard it is to be deceptive, and something else that I haven't yet defined. Okay, so remember that big table. There were a few lines with words in it, and then there were 3 columns with blank spots. I gave you an indication of some of the answers in the first column, that is about lying and equilibrium. And now I'm going to give you an indication of some of the answers in the second column, which is about deception. And these two things are really, really trivial mathematically, but I think that they're very important for my story. The first thing says, for any interpretation, for any mu is the way that you interpret what I say, the speaker will have a strategy that's not deceptive. What does that mean? It means that my world of thinking about deception, I can avoid it if I want to. Okay? So when we talk about lying, I can avoid lying, I just tell you the state. Okay? We talk about deception, I can avoid deception. And here basically, I know all the things that you could believe, and I figure out the n that gives you beliefs that are closest to point mass on theta. I can always do that. Okay? This is important in my mind because some alternative definitions of deception won't satisfy this property. Okay, the second thing is also trivial. Suppose that for one reason or another, you don't think that I'm reliable. If you don't think that I'm reliable, one way to model that is you don't care what I say, it doesn't influence how you believe things. Okay, so that the mu function doesn't depend on m. In that case, I can't deceive you. All the beliefs that you offer out to me are the same, so the one that actually I make happen is no worse than any other. It's exactly the same. What does that mean? There's always a way for you to not be deceived. Now, do you want to be like that? Probably not in general. That is to say, if you refuse to believe anything I say, you won't be deceived, but you'll never learn anything from me. So there's a sense in which you want to open yourself out to the possibility of being deceived so that you can actually be influenced in a positive way. But these two things are mathematically trivial, but they're simple and nice properties. Okay. Let me try to give you a little story here. So when might you have deception? So here's a situation where maybe my student is really good or really bad, and I'm going to say something to you. It's sometimes the case that the equilibrium of this kind of model has the following form. If my student is really good, I say she's really good. If my student is not so good, some of the time I say she's good, and some of the time I say she's not so good. Why might that happen? Well, I want my student to get a good job, but I don't want my student to get a job that's a lot too good. So I don't want my bad student placed in a situation where they'll immediately find out that she's not competent. The best position for her is sort of a little bit better than her objective value, in my mind. And it turns out that if you have an equilibrium that involves if you imagine me telling the whole truth, then I'd want to lie, and you sort of fix that up by a situation where when I have a bad student, I randomize. Situations like this are easy to write down. They come up in a lot of applications, and what's relevant for this discussion is that sometimes when I have a bad student, I say that she is good. In those situations, I have a choice. I can say she's bad, she'll know she's bad, you'll know she's bad, and your beliefs will be perfect. If I say she's good, you'll be a little bit confused. You won't think she's good. You'll realize in equilibrium that I might be lying to you, but you will put positive probability on her being good. That's deception. Okay? I could have told you something that was completely accurate. You would have believed it if I said she was bad. I don't. Okay. So there's some issues here now. I've got the notion of lying. I've got the notion of deception. So I could ask myself, if I lie, must I be deceiving you? If I deceive, must I lie? Well, there's a sense in which these things are different. So lying requires a dictionary, and the deception part really doesn't. But this is one direction. So there's a story that maybe you have read already. So the Jews meet in a railway station in Galicia. One of them says, "Where are you going?" And the other says, "To Krakow." I can't do the Central European dialects that would make this a better joke. "What a liar you are," broke out the other. "If you say you're going to Krakow, you want me to believe you're going to Limburg. But I know you're going to Krakow. Why are you lying to me?" And then the discussion here by someone who is less confident about definitions. So here's the story. This guy knows where he's going, but he lives in a world in which the person he's talking to thinks about opposite day. And maybe the intention of the speaker is to convince the person of the wrong thing, but by telling the literal truth. Okay, so if you think that I'm the guy who always tells you that it's sunny when it's raining out, then when it's raining and I say it's raining, I'm going to be deceiving you. Okay? So this is from Freud's joke book, and this paragraph suggests that he's not sure what the definition of truth is. Okay, I am. Okay, first column, lying. Second column, deception. Third column is perlocution. So now I introduce you to what happens to the people. Okay? The first is what I say versus the dictionary. The second is what you believe relative to the truth. And the third is what happens to you. So I need a little bit of notation to talk about this. That symbol is the following. What matters to the receiver? Well, there are a few letters of the alphabet. A theta is the state of the world. An X is the action the informed person takes, which hasn't played much of a role in today's talk. An M is what the informed person says, which has played a lot of a role. And then there was a Y. That's what the receiver does. Well, the M is going to trigger a Y. When I say something, you do something. And therefore, I can figure out or, conjecture, have a model of your utility given what I say by just substituting in that Y. And that's what the U upper bar is. So U upper bar is what you get, your happiness, your utility, if I say M, if I take the action X, if the state is theta, then what's missing is the fact that when I say M, you take the action Y. Okay. These two bits of symbols say the following. Remember, deception was when I said M, but I could have said N, and N led to better beliefs. Damage is I say M, I could have said N, and N leads to higher utility. There's a sense in which this is an easier definition because when I'm talking about consequences to you, your utility is sort of lined up. That is to say, there's no ambiguity about what's good or bad. I don't have many flavors of this definition. Okay, so again, this is just something to think about. It's another possibility. And then I move down the table and I say, what are some properties? Okay, so these properties, the first two, are parallel to what I said were trivial but somehow substantively important properties of deception. So the first one says the finiteness is just a technicality. For every state, for every way of responding to a state, the sender will have a strategy that is not damaging. If I don't want to hurt you, I don't have to. Why is that? Well, damage is about comparing what I say to what I could have said. So I can have a model of your behavior. I can figure out what thing I could say that will lead to your highest utility, and I could say it. Would I do that in a strategic context? Well, probably not in general, because sometimes making you the happiest doesn't make me the happiest. But it's possible. That is to say, in this framework, damage is something that's voluntary. If I damage you, it's because I made a choice to do so. The second line is also parallel. You can fix it so that I can't damage you. And the way that you fix it is basically to ignore my message. Okay? Please.
So you mentioned before that white lies are outside the scope, but isn't that a bit of a white lie that I lie but I make you better off?
Right. So what the sense in which white lies are outside of my scope is that nothing in the definition of lying talks about color. It doesn't talk about whether it's good for you or bad for you. White lying doesn't necessarily have to be out of the framework scope, because this is a situation where now I am talking about consequences. So I can go back now and talk about lies that damage and lies that don't damage, and I can call the damaging lies black lies and the non-damaging lies white lies.
So my point is that I think that when we talk about white lies, we have in mind early
Okay, that's perfectly fine, and I will agree with that, and say that what that means is that in a lot of situations, the large category of lies used in common usage slips over into more categories than I chose. So I'm taking a position that's narrow. The other thing that may be implicit in what you're saying, that's certainly in my mind, is that the consequences of lies presumably will interact with the costs of lies. So I've suggested a few times that inside of a research agenda, you want to have these formulations because you think that there are economic costs to lies, they matter, they should be in models. And the definition of lying alone is not enough information to tell you the right way to include these costs. These things probably do. Okay. So this line is sort of consistent with things that I've said before. There's nothing in the strategic modeling that would say, no, you wouldn't damage anybody in equilibrium. And in fact, sort of almost to the contrary, in a lot of interesting games, this damage is a consequence of conflict of interest. Okay, if this were a technical talk, this is basically the only place where I have pride of doing something that's sort of mathematically non-trivial. I'm going to try to tell you why or what I'm doing. And if you care about the technicalities, then you have to invite me back. So here's an informal statement. I had the funny quote about Lemberg and lying that was meant to show that lying and deception are different things. Okay? Deception and damaging, I want to argue, are pretty closely related. So one can prove propositions where deception causes damage. That is to say, if I deceive you, then I'm damaging you. And conversely, if I damage you, it's the result of deception. And these results are a little bit subtle, but they're roughly in this form. If M is a deceptive message, then the receiver will do better if I use the message that was better, more accurate. This is a little bit intuitive. That is to say, the N induces more accurate beliefs, so you make better decisions. It's a little bit subtle because there could be ties. That is to say, it could be that M and N allow the same action to happen. This is sort of the converse. If I'm not deceiving you, then there's a world, and by a world I mean some specification of preferences in which I'm not damaging you. Okay, so there are a lot of different ways you can have preferences. Now, if you remember, I gave you two flavors of deception. There was that shaded triangle, and then there was the line segment. And I said one was really easy and one was really hard. And I'm writing down a result here that looks like it's about all flavors of deception. So how can that be? And the answer is there exists a specification of preferences. So basically, the proper notion of what are bad beliefs depends on context. And the context is basically what kind of ways can the receiver evaluate things. And the very, very strong notion of deception, the line segment, the specification of preferences has to be drawn from all possible preferences. For the specific definition of deception, the preferences can be drawn from a limited set. And the limited set basically are all the receiver cares about is getting the state right. So you have an action that's good for state 1, and an action that's good for state 2, and so on. So that's a little bit technical. The takeaway message here is the top line. It's a sense that deception is equal to damage. Okay, so you can prove a series of results along those lines. Okay, let's skip. This is a critique. So here I am, arrogant, aging scholar, and I decide I'm going to write a dictionary. And I'm going to write a dictionary, and I'm going to put in words that everybody knows the meaning of. And sometimes they use these words in important ways. So one place where there's flexibility is my intuitive notion of further from the truth. Okay, I've indicated two definitions. In fact, you can construct a family. Another thing that you might think about, and I think that this comes up in a lot of informal discussions, is that I deceive you relative to a benchmark. So in my stories, I'm deceiving you relative to other things you might believe. Okay? That means that if you never believe me, I can't deceive you. If you always believe the sky is blue, no matter what I say, then I'm not deceiving you when I say the sky is blue and the sky is brown. Okay? Another way to think about deception is that you have a prior belief. And the prior belief is everything's equally likely. The truth is that state 1 is true. And I'm deceiving you if for some reason I move you away from the prior belief further from state 1 is right. So I think there's some intuition to that. But if you never believe the prior belief, that is to say, if your mu function is such that everything I say changes your opinion about the world, okay, if I can say it's good or bad, if I say it's good, you lower your assessment of the world. Sorry, if I say it's good, you raise your assessment of the world. If I say it's bad, you lower it. You'll never keep it the same. Then in this situation, there may be situations where I can't avoid deceiving you. And I find that a little bit awkward. I don't want to include that. There's another thing in this that's also sort of interesting. In my formal discussion, there's no such thing as silence. That is to say, I've got abstract messages. But informally, if we're communicating, you might interpret actual active participation in the conversation, saying things differently than not participating at all. If it is the case that you always interpret silence as you're not changing your beliefs, and it doesn't have to be, but maybe that's a behavioral assumption, then I'm quite close to this definition. Okay, these are a couple of comments. If you look at the philosophical literature, there's a lot of talk about deception involving manipulation of beliefs and nothing about consequences. So in fact, I'm closer to the philosophers when I talk about deception than when I talk about lying. And the second is that there's a sense in which I might actually be entering into public policy debates. So the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC in the United States, actually has rules about what's a deceptive practice and what's not. And they have a benchmark, so they imagine that the beliefs are not your beliefs, but they're beliefs of some representative normal consumer. And then they basically talk about situations that are quite parallel to what I do. Okay. There was column 1, that was locution. There was column 2, that was illocution. There was column 3, that was perlocution. So I did lying, I did deception, I did damage. So why aren't I done? There's still a few moments, right? So I'm not done because perlocution is about consequences. And when I talked about damage, I talked about the other guy. But I can talk about my consequences as well. So we're going to conclude the talk by looking at these possibilities. So here are a couple of words. So now I have the M's and the X's. But here's the idea. When I'm thinking about what to say, I'm triggering an action from you. So this stuff is the utility that I get if this is what I believe to be true, this is what I do and you don't see, this is the action you take when I say N. Over there is what happens if I say M. But these two things are idealized quantities. This is the action that you would take if you knew the state was theta. Okay? In the game that we're actually playing, you don't know the state is theta. You hear Z, you don't observe, you hear N, you don't observe my Z, you don't observe theta, so you're sort of muddling through in the dark. What is a charade? A charade is a situation where I do something that I wouldn't have done if you knew what I knew. Okay? So the difference between this inequality and the inequality that rules in a game is that in the inequality that rules in a game, the action that you take doesn't get to depend on theta. Okay, so here is an example of a charade. In the standard labor market signaling environment, I know my ability, and you can only observe my education. And the model works and concentrates on an equilibrium in which the amount of education that you get is strictly increasing in your ability. You see that education level, you translate it and invert and learn my ability. Okay? So in equilibrium, I have to get a lot of education because otherwise you won't think that I'm high ability because you can't directly see it. That behavior is a charade because if you could see it, I wouldn't have to go to school at all. Okay? So that's what this inequality says. This is another definition. A bluff is a charade with deception. Why do I do that? Because bluff, of course, is associated with poker. Okay? And it's not really associated with labor market signaling. Okay? In poker, the situation that you should have in mind is that I have a terrible hand and I make a bet. The reason that I make a bet is that in your head, is the idea that I might have a really good hand and you walk away and I win all the money. Okay? I wouldn't do that if you could see my hand. Because if you could see my hand, you'd look at the bet, you'd laugh, you'd match it, you'd take my money. Okay? And when I do that, it's only going to work if I deceive you. That is to say, it's only going to work for me to bet a lot with a bad hand if there's a chance that it will induce bad beliefs in your head. Okay? And I'll only do it because you can't see my hand. So bluffing is, I think, a fairly natural translation of the word that we use in practice. Okay? Now, I've been acting as if I should stop at 3:30. Is that correct? Good. Okay. So you can write down some properties of these charades. I don't think that they're exceptionally wonderful things, so I will not dwell on them. I will go back to this table. So this is the table that I showed you, and I said 21 results. Ha ha ha, nobody does that. We didn't really do all of these things, but I just want to indicate that we learned some of this stuff. So we talked about avoidability. So those Y's mean, yes, in my world, you don't have to lie. You don't have to deceive. You don't have to damage. We talked about the relationship between deception and the other things. Okay, so there is a connection between deception and lying? Not really. Damage and lying? Not really. Deception and damaging? There were some theorems. Okay, so we have this table. This line says, yeah, all these things can happen with rational players, and so on. Okay, this is sort of a summary. When talk is cheap, game theory pays no attention to literal meanings, so that means that you can talk about communication in games and not know what lying is. That means that when you define lying, there's no real connection between lies and equilibrium in these games. What matters is that messages influence beliefs, and this is something that you might keep in mind when you're thinking about where the costs of these behaviors are. Should I do this? It says, so this is, we're not doing the scientific part of the talk anymore, right? Okay. So my answer to this is, well, let's reflect on my definition.
Try it on Bob Aumann? Did you try this slide on Bob Aumann?
No, I have not. Okay. So maybe I call him after the talk and I show him the slide. So is Trump a liar? What's my definition? It's a lie is when you say something you believe to be false. And I don't know what Donald Trump believes. So it's plausible that he believes what he says. And there is a word for what Donald Trump uses. It's a technical word that philosophers have studied, and it's bullshit. These are statements that basically are made without regard to the truth value at all. These are people who I would argue are clearly liars. So Brexit, Nigel Falls, Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, who, when he was being interviewed, sort of forgot about meeting with Russians. Martin Vinderkorn had some problems with Volkswagen's emission controls. So these are people who knew what they were talking about, and they said something that was literally false. If you want to talk about people in American politics who are liars, you can remember what Bill Clinton said. It depends on what the meaning of the word is there's no doubt what he knew and what he was thinking, okay? Deceiving, I think, is something that you can probably attribute with 100% certainty to all of the people that I've mentioned. What is this good for? I hope you've had a good time. Taxonomy, clarity, consistency. This was an exercise that helped me think about categories. I claim that there really is a relationship between cost of lying and cost of deception. There's a body of experimental evidence I claim that identifies that economic agents have systematic costs of lying, and it identifies that if there are costs of deception, they're much smaller. Okay, so framing things as deception versus lying matters. To the extent that I want to talk about contemporary politics, I would argue that in models of strategic communication, it's brittle. It doesn't have to be that you can get effective communication just because it's logically possible. It's an interesting fact that in these formal games, even when we have the same interests, you can cross your arms and refuse to believe what I say, and I will not have an ability to communicate with you. And such a configuration is an equilibrium. And there's a sense in which it's a gift to be in another equilibrium. And I would say that modern discourse has poisoned that well. So by having somebody who is sort of speaks in a way that is in total disregard to truth, it raises doubts about the possibility of having effective communication in other contexts. I think I should stop now. Yeah, let me stop. So thank you for listening to me. It has been an honor indeed.
The concept of charade, whenever I remember hearing people using the term, it's always this sense of transparency, that it's obvious that you're putting on a charade. So I'm missing that. It's transparent that you're putting out.
So the answer to that is if that is something that's triggered by everybody, then my word is wrong. So how to say it? I hope it is. So nobody else has made that remark. I'm not in a position to say that it's wrong. See, I'd like to have a Coleman and Kay survey of charade, but you're absolutely right that it's at odds with my formal definition. So if I Google
charade and I Google stop the charade, and say 80% of the time people use the term charade in the context of stop the charade, and it sort of would suggest that people use that when it's kind of clear that somebody's.
I'm not sure. So let me be kind of wooden and go back to the Spence model. So I could imagine somebody saying, your excess investment in education was a charade. There's something transparent about the equilibrium there. Everybody knows that you overinvested in education, but you couldn't help yourself. So that's broadly consistent with what you're saying, but ultimately I think this is something that maybe your search can add evidence to, but it can't be resolved by me making a confident statement now.
I wonder whether there's also the possibility that there is deception unintentionally because of the fact that the receiver misinterprets things. I wonder whether your definitions actually capture that, allow for that, or this is outside your definitions?
It's outside what I wrote down today. It's inside what I have written down. So the way that you would augment the model is to distinguish between the M that goes in, what I say, and the M prime that goes out, what you hear. And if you do that, you can write down the same formalism, and essentially what I would do for deception is take into account the distortion.
You would have to have two dictionaries?
You could, so indeed, that my definition is all in terms of the input language. So I actually deleted the quote that is relevant to this. So I had a story that came from the novel Gravity's Rainbow. And in Gravity's Rainbow, the main character is named Oedipa Mas. and she is being interviewed by her husband. And her husband says into the microphone, "Thank you, Edna Mass, for talking." And then he turns off the microphone, and the main character turns to the interviewer and says, "Why did you call me Edna Mass? My name is Oedipus Mass." And he says, "Don't worry about it. I understand how this equipment works, and there's distortion. And when I say Edna Mass, the people at home will hear Oedipus Mass." So in this situation, my definition would include the statement, would call that a lie, but it wouldn't be deceptive because the output would be exactly right if people were credulous. So the formal definitions, the formal model includes exactly the possibilities, and whether or not my terminology corresponds to your intuition is not clear. So my terminology would require me to say the words according to my dictionary in order to tell the truth, but I may want to say the words according to your dictionary or an inverted form in order to convey the right information to you. So it allows a tension between deception and dishonesty, and the definitions take a particular point of view. I don't want to argue that that point of view is canonical, that is to say your interpretation might be modal. It's certainly plausible, but according to my definitions, I have to say the literal truth according to my definition in order to be telling the truth, even if I would want to distort it in order to convey the right information to you.
I mean, in a deception assumes that I know than you, I know what beliefs
Yes.
I can use, right? And I could just like with lying, I might have the wrong beliefs, and there is a distinction there. What about?
So in all of these things, if I didn't know, I would still want to assume that the sender had models, and I would want these definitions to be in terms of the sender's model. So it is not literally your beliefs, it's what I believe your beliefs to be. And in the same way, the state in evaluating lying is not literally the state, it's the state as I believe it. So you could imagine carrying out this analysis entirely in my own head, and the sense in which my head is related to your head is an equilibrium condition. And so if I didn't want to impose equilibrium, then I wouldn't require what I thought you were going to believe to be what you actually believed, and I would define deception in terms of not the actual beliefs you have, but the ones in my mind.
That sort of assumes a similar result to the Coleman K for deception, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Your example, brings in general the idea, what happens if you have several receivers with different, prior beliefs about things? So how would you define deception in general?
My first answer to this, and it could be that in a couple of years I'll have a different, but it would be that I would have to make it context specific. So I'm deceiving the right half of the room and not the left half of the room. So I'd say something is deceptive if there exists an agent such that blah, 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 or I would say something is deceptive to agent one. But you're absolutely right.
What about the lie? So the lie would be...
The lie doesn't depend on my model of you. So if I'm lying to you, I'm lying to them too. It doesn't matter. Yeah. Okay. So that in a sense is a value of this kind of strict trichotomy. I have a logical wall that separates damage and deception, because those require theories of mind or empathy. and lying does not.
Which, by the way, in politics, this is not necessarily always the case, because a politician may speak different languages to two different audiences. So you may say one thing to one audience and another thing to another audience, so that would not be captured, I guess, in this kind of model. Right? Is that correct?
Well, again, I would sort of look at the context one at a time, so it could very well be that I don't deceive my base, or I deceive my base and I don't deceive the people who are not my base. So there would be one event in which I talk to you and I talk in a certain way, and maybe I talk to Saki in a different way, and we would analyze those two things separately. And maybe I lie to you, maybe I deceive him, and so it's in my bag of tricks, I think.
Okay, thank you very, very much. After a talk like this, it's very hard to make a compliment.
That can be interpreted in many ways.
So as Shmulevitz would say, thank you for a terrific talk.
There is an example that I considered using. The letter of recommendation says that you would be very fortunate indeed to have Sobel work for you. And whether it means that I've never worked before or